Good morning, everybody, and thank you for tuning in today. You have joined Carrie and I. I'm Erin Kopek, and I'm the VP of Sales and Marketing at Higher Level. You have joined our HiNotes program for the month of May. Super excited to introduce you to Carrie. She has spoke with us before, president of North Star Coaching, and she's going to share a little bit today about those tough conversations that we all have to have within our businesses. Carrie is a friend and also a consultant to Higher Level, so love having her on and helping her share her wealth of knowledge with all of us that need it. So a few housekeeping items before we begin. This call will last less than an hour, so 30-45 minutes out of your day, and hopefully some great takeaways. You do have access to a chat and message function. If you have questions for Carrie throughout the presentation, feel free to send those out and we will take a look at those and get those answered for you. All right, so just a quick bio about Carrie, and she can elaborate on this, of course. So Carrie is the president of North Star Coaching, a consulting company that focuses on helping leaders slow down to go fast and achieve ambitious goals. Carrie's work includes training executives, facilitating difficult conversations, increasing accountability through team development, designing and implementing leadership programs, coaching leaders, and strategic planning. I pass it off to you, Carrie, to teach us a thing or two this morning.
Thanks, Erin. Boy, that's a fat list of just things that it creates all the messiness. I often joke like work is easy except for the people side, right? But your comments, Erin, about I'm a friend and a consultant with Higher Level, it's neat how Higher Level approaches those relationships, because Erin and I actually met through a Chamber of Commerce networking thing, and I became the consultant first and the friend second. And as I've worked with Higher Level over the years, they are really a relational company. So if you're looking for support from them in the work you do, they're a good group to partner with. Okay.
Thank you, Carrie.
Yeah, of course. So let me jump into sharing my screen. Here we go. Oh my goodness, here we go. There we go. Excellent. Erin and I were practicing this before, and I might have just messed it up. Okay, I see where it is. Erin, can you see my screen?
Yes, all good on my end.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. So really want everyone to feel like they can connect with me after. There's a QR code there. Feel free to reach out. My email, my cell phone number's on there, text, call. I really believe that I'm like my personal mission in life is to be a bridge for people. So if there's a way that you get some concepts today that help you have tough conversations, or you just want to crystallize something that you're thinking about, or you want to just jump on a call quickly with me and just talk through something, I am game for all of that stuff. So just know that that's why my contact information is there. All right, let's talk through what we're going to talk through. There we go. Okay. So really, high objectives today is we want to make connections and help you make connections with each other. So when you look through the texting string, look for people's name, check them out on LinkedIn, see if there's those connections. Like, we don't make sense of the hard part of work, which is the people part, alone. So make some connections. We're going to learn about the 8 steps in a tough conversation, particularly the first 2 steps we're going to dive into because they are the hardest steps. And we're also going to get clear on what the issue is. So in 9 parts, some of them faster than others, we're going to make connections, define why tough conversations are just so stinking hard, understand triggers and how they really work and affect us, explore the spheres of control. Sometimes there is fear around that. Understand the daily spin, think strategically around the issue behind your tough conversation, nail down the issue, view the other 6 steps, and really talk through commitments that you're going to have with this learning and answer any questions. But as Erin said when we opened, I'm super flexible in my facilitation. So if you want to chat into question as we're going, just like chat fluidly and we'll pause and kind of go slow to go fast and meet you where you are. All right, first thing I want to see in the chat, would you rather A, have a hard conversation, or B, keep living with the situation? Let me see in the chat, what do you answer? Again, it's interactive. I imagine some of you might be multitasking with all the pressures of a Wednesday morning, but really stay with me. Let's dive into this together. Would you rather have a hard conversation or keep living with the situation? Yeah. You probably know what the population in general says with that, right? So the hard conversation is hard, and it makes us often just sort of put it under the rug and keep living with the situation. So we want to help you have the hard conversation. What's neat about having the hard conversation is it doesn't have to be a conflict. You'll notice in these 8 steps that nowhere in there are we fixing the problem yet. Having the hard conversation is really about you and the other person developing a shared understanding of what an issue is. And it might only be your issue, but there's at least engaging the other person and understanding your side of it and appreciating that there's an issue from your perspective. That's the whole point of the tough conversation. The fixing happens after the delivery of the tough conversation. All right. So what makes the conversations tough? Again, I'd love to see you chat in on some of this. So we know that we have a tendency to avoid tough conversations. Like, why? Why are tough conversations just so tough? Yeah, I think of this picture and this person with just like a bunch of crumpled up ideas in their head, right? They're in a dark spot. There's competing ideas. It's vulnerable. They're not going to understand me. Like, we start developing the story in our head about the situation and why the person's just not going to engage. And that really makes it tough to have, because you've got to be vulnerable initiating the hard conversation. And when you're ticked off with somebody, let's be honest, they're the last person you feel like being vulnerable with, right? So that's just some recognition going in, that if you are ready to have tough conversations, and if you're even here at this WebEx, there is a reason that you're here. You have tough conversations in your life, or maybe you have a tough conversation that you need to have. So that's awesome. And it means that you have to take that vulnerable step forward. You have to put on your grown-up pants, and you have to be the brave one, because you're ready. You're ready for that tough conversation. All right, so I see that people were really chatty this morning. We haven't really talked about tough conversations from your side, but let me add in a few pieces. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a quick second. And I'm going to have a story to share with you. So years ago, this is an example of a tough conversation, and it's a personal one. So tough conversations happen personally, professionally, whatever it is. And we're going to talk through some professional examples too. But many years ago, my partner and I were in the kitchen from Western Canada, Calgary, Alberta. And we had just felt like our life was a little too comfortable. I'd been fast-tracked on the administrative route in kindergarten to grade 12 schools. My husband was a chiropractor. He had hospital privileges, which never happens in Canada, never mind anywhere else. And we just felt like in our 30s, we had hit the ceiling. Like, we were going to sort of coast to retirement, and that's not the kind of people we are. And so we decided to put a couple of rods in the fire. I applied for a teaching job in the Netherlands at a NATO base, and my partner applied for med school. I did not get the job. He got med school. And so he started medical school at 39. Now, when you're 39, you don't get into sort of North American schools, as a general statement. He'd already had a career and GPA and volunteers and like all the rigor that they look for in med school. So we moved to the Caribbean for 2 years. And this is where the tough conversation started. My mom, love her to pieces, struggled with this, and other people too. I mean, people thought we just fell off our rocker. And Mom and I have kind of joked about this since. And I tried to have tough conversations with Mom, because I felt like her concerns were, she's worried my husband was having a midlife crisis. You know, in hindsight, maybe true. She was worried that, like, why am I leaving this great job that was not letting me have a leave of absence? Like, I had to quit the school board where I was. Just like we were just uprooting everything. And she had a lot of concerns and expressed them. Well, I tried to have a hard conversation with my mom, and I followed the 8 steps that we talked about today. Although I didn't get at step number 1 and number 2 really well, because those are the hardest steps to get through. So I sat down with my mom, and I did it in her living room, her backyard, like a couple of times, and it just didn't get anywhere. And finally, I thought, oh, let's go shopping. I need to approach this a different strategy. Sometimes people do better with tough conversations, you know, if they're moving. And so Mom and I went shopping. We had a shoe store that we love. I mean, I don't need shoes. I moved into the Caribbean. We took 8 boxes in total of our entire life when we moved away. I don't need more shoes. But this is a good activity, keep busy, whatever. And I started off and just like hammered the second step, which is name the issue, and said, Mom, The negative comments have got to stop. Oh, what are you talking about? She's trying on shoes. Like, they inspire fear. Oh, and from then on in, we went for steamed milk after at Starbucks. Like, it just changed everything. But I wasn't getting clear on what my triggers were around my mom's support of our decision. I wasn't really clear on what the tough conversation needed to be about. So let's dive into, we've talked about the vulnerable side of tough conversations and how people don't really want to open up their heart and talk about why something is tough when they're frustrated with the other person, right? We're afraid of conflict. So let's look at what some of those triggers are and give you some more tools to kind of make sense of why tough conversations are tough. So when I talk about triggers, I'm talking those things that make you go from 0 to 100, those things that tick you off right away. We all have them. And the more muscles we have in our emotional intelligence, I think, Erin, that was something that we did a couple of years ago. The more muscles we have in our emotional intelligence, the better we can manage our triggers. But still, they're there, right? And often tough conversations are tough because we are triggered. So when you think through, and I see we're still being a quiet group, we want to think through, what are my triggers and where is the tough conversation coming up? So for me, I really had to be this kid putting on the cape, advocating with my mom to stop the negativity because it's inspiring fear. Whew. Right? I mean, mom's just looking out for me. I know that she's not doing this from a place of, I want to scare the crap out of Carrie because she's, moving to the Caribbean. Mom was doing it because she loved me. And so this was a tough conversation because I didn't want to hurt her feelings. I didn't want there to be a conflict. I'm moving away from the country for a couple of years. I'm not going to see her for a while. I don't want to wrap things up on a negative note. All of these stories in my head were happening when really, once I actually nailed down what the real issue was, it was a nothing burger. She's like, oh, okay, I had steamed milk, right? So let's think about a tough conversation that some of you might have coming up. Maybe it's with a colleague, maybe it's with a friend, a family member, and let's apply it to a real situation. So as you're thinking about that, I'm really hoping someone will chime in on the chat. Let's talk about what your own triggers are. So in the chat, I'm going to type in some things here just from my consulting and leadership work. These are some triggers that people sort of say, put me 0 to 100, like they're in my way. People are overtly getting in my way of being successful. They're keeping information, right? It's just, they're sabotaging you when that happens, right? As the person who feels that you're being put in a rock and a hard place, that you're not being set up for success. People are mean. There's no trust. Oh, let me spell that right. They put you down, right? They interrupt you. Those are all like, I'm going to go 0 to 100. That's disrespectful on a basic level. And so just know, what are your triggers? For me personally, I notice that if I don't feel heard, add the D on that typo, if I don't feel heard, I find myself repeating the same thing over and over again. That's a trigger for me. And I know that I'm being triggered when I catch myself repeating the same thing. Well, that just might be people aren't ready to hear it. And so I need to adjust my strategy, right? So these questions help you identify your trigger, right? So what is a source of frustration for me right now? If you think about the situation where you need to have a tough conversation, we really need to slow down and think, what are my triggers? What's sort of getting at the spin that I'm in about this and ultimately the issue that I'm going towards? Another question is, how long has this frustration been going on? So for example, years ago, I was an administrator in a school, and I had a teacher who was just not a good teacher. So when I think about applying this method to this tough conversation with her, I failed at the tough conversation. I didn't really get at what the frustration was. And if I was honest, my real frustration with the teacher was that she was hurting the kids. It's a tough message, right? How long had this frustration been going on? For 2 years. She sucked as a teacher, and it was hurting the kids. And as a result, the children went from middle school classroom with this teacher, and they were spinning out because they felt disrespected and she wasn't an effective teacher. And so they would go to their next class, imagine the hormonal kids, and they would wig out more. So not only are the kids being hurt, but now the other teachers are being impacted by her poor teaching. I wasn't able at that time, didn't have these strategies to really articulate what was triggering for me. So if I think of that situation with the teacher, given the best predictor of future behavior and past behavior, when was this person's behavior any different, right? Gosh, this has been going on for 2 years with her, the whole time that I've been her administrator. What response has this person been to suggestions that I have made? So what's interesting when we think about this situation with this colleague is we had a staff room that was shaped like a U with 2 doors, and I would come in one door and she would literally go out the other. That tells you how ineffective I was at having tough conversations. And I remember one day I walked in and she was like zoning out with the toaster, smelling the toast coming up and feeling the heat from the toaster, and she didn't hear me enter the staff room. And I sat all up beside her. Hey, I think you're avoiding me. And I'm trying to like break the ice and being all cheery, like, let's talk through stuff, because I didn't have the skills yet to do the first 2 steps that we're really zeroing in on today, which was understanding what your spin is about and identifying the real issue. And she said, yeah, I am. Well, we never got to what the real conversation was with her. I ended up going to the Caribbean right after. And she, 2 years later, I heard quit the profession. But it took the new administrator with better skills than mine at the time to have the tough conversation on, is this really the career you want? Here's the behavior I see happening from you that's getting in the way of you kind of shining your best. So, triggers. I wasn't slowing down enough to first identify what are my triggers. So these questions will help you. And then you want to think, who has pushed this issue before? And by pushed it, I mean brought it up with the person. No one had brought it up with them before, right? Which changes the need for the tough conversation. So when we think about triggers, often people are spending a lot of time in the out of control sphere here. So we get triggered by stuff out of our control, right? Every time that teacher would walk out of that classroom or out of that staff room, it was out of my control. I can't force her to stay there. But man, it put me 0 to 100. Ticked me off quickly. Now, what's in my control? My ability to have the conversation with her. And sometimes I joke like this center in our control box should be super small because really very little of life is actually in our control. Now, sometimes we can influence stuff, which is great, but typically people spend more time in the out of control stuff, and they think that the issue is related to this out of control stuff, and we need to zero it in and think, what are our triggers? And let go of this stuff that's out of our control so that we get really clear on stuff that's in our control. You with me? Okay. So one thing I often say when we sort of slow down to say, like, what's my trigger? What's causing this spin? Is really if you feel like you're pushing a boulder, you are, right? And that often has us maybe transactionally working on stuff like the busy work and not the real work. So just be aware, like if you feel like you're pushing a boulder, you are. Different strategy, different issue, get at the problem differently. Another trigger is really feeling like you're not in the circle. So when people feel undervalued, they don't feel trusted, they're not looped in, they're not included. It's funny how I hear this from my clients often. I'm doing some work with a police department, and one of the leaders even talked about a trigger around, I'm not included on some of the email chains. That's a trigger. It doesn't feel good. I'm outside of the circle. So it really doesn't matter what the industry is, whether you're a conversation with your mom, whether you're, in an education setting, a police setting. I know at higher level, we've talked about this concept, lots of pulling everyone into the circle. It's a trigger when we feel left out for everyone. Like basic need is that sense of belonging. Another thing is not being set up for success. So if that information isn't being shared with you because no one copied you on email, that's a 0 to 100 trigger. People need to feel set up for success. These are basic human needs that create the circumstance for a tough conversation, right? Can you control if you're looped in all the time? No, you can't force people to remember you on email chains, for example, but you can have the tough conversation, right? Can you make sure everyone else does what they need to do to set you up for success? No, you can have the tough conversation. So I talked about that sense of feeling valued. This is often a trigger for people, right? And we need to find the words to identify the issue behind how you're not feeling valued. So part of what you want to ask yourself before you even enter the tough conversation is this the right conversation, right? Not everyone's ready for the tough conversation. And if people aren't ready, well, that would be you pushing a boulder. It's not going to go anywhere, and you're probably going to tick people off more. Really, 10% of the population thrives on conflict, which is a very quick translation means you might be ready for the tough conversation, but 10% of the time the other person's not, and they're never going to be. So you might frame up a tough conversation and say to someone, hey, I've got something that I want to talk with you. And you might get to step one and figure out what the issue is. And then step two, identify the issue with them. And the other person is just cantankerous. They shut you down. They're not listening. Well, that's when you just walk away and you're like, whew, good to know. Not ready for a tough conversation. Not someone I'm going to collaborate with. Not someone who's ready for the right work. And not everybody is. So I need to just disclaim from the get-go, we might wish everyone's ready for the tough conversation. Not everyone is. And that's where your self-discipline comes into play to recognize that and not push a boulder. Okay. So what else do we need to do to make sure that we're having the tough conversation? Well, we need to recognize I'm in a spin and I need to get to the bottom of what that spin is, really the root cause, before I can collaborate with that person on the solutions around the tough conversation. So that's really the first step is getting to the bottom of your spin. So we get to the bottom of our spin by identifying a few things. So when did the frustration begin? And be as specific as you can, right? So if you feel undervalued, did that first feeling come into play because of a promotion that you were not looked for, because of some feedback that people gave you, because how included you are in some project stuff? Like, really get to the bottom of your spin. So our goal is to get to the root cause so that we can identify the issue, which is number 2, right? So first, when did the frustration begin? Second, what other life experiences have you had that are similar to this one, and what happened? And this is really getting you to figure out, like, am I identifying the right root cause, or is this sort of bringing up some other experiences that are being really pivotal in my development as a leader, as a person, as a man, as a woman? So that's number 2, is like some truth serum for yourself. You want to make sure that you're getting at, honestly, is this a trigger from another experience, or is this the real thing going on? And also, if you felt that you had a healthy trust and respect for that person, if you took your shield down, got real, laid it on the table, how is this person's actions hurting you, undermining the work, or needing to shift? So that's really asking you, what is going on? Like, what's the root cause of the bottom of your spin? So these questions kind of help chunk it out for you. So if we were to drill down here, these are some surface issues before people have done step 1. I'm going to add in some words here. So you keep interrupting me, right? That's a common complaint that people might have. Well, if we were to drill down and look at some of those questions that we just asked, right? When did the frustrations begin? What other life experiences are related to this one? And maybe you did do some things to make it better. Maybe they went splat, like you need to self-manage that, because we're all a product of our experiences. And then if you really laid it out, what's on there? So if I really laid out the bottom of the spin, the root cause of the issue, maybe I feel disrespected. Wow, right? You're not invited to the leadership meetings. I'm not set up for success. Maybe you've taken 3 vacations and I haven't had any, right? Maybe it's just simply I'm burned out. So even in this one, maybe the boss approved the vacations. It had nothing to do with the person that's taking all the vacation, but they just asked for it and got it. Well, it doesn't have to be a conflict now, does it? And even with, I'm not invited to leadership meetings, I'm not set up for success, that could be very simply transactional, like a process improvement thing. You keep interrupting me, and that doesn't have to be a conflict. That other person is ideally going to go, man, I never meant for you to feel, let's talk. Wow. Right? And if the other person on this first one says, you keep interrupting me, I feel disrespected, is the real issue, they're like, well, that's your problem. Ding, ding, ding. Not ready for a crucial conversation, right? And that's where you pull out different tools, which are different workshops. Okay, so number 2, here's helping us identify the issues. So what's a persistent pattern here? So if the person does keep interrupting you at meetings, what's the pattern, right? You never get a chance to say your wisdom, your insights, your brilliance, right? The pattern is that they're interrupting me. What is the connection between the issue and the bottom of your spin, right? So I don't feel valued and they keep interrupting me. I want to make a connection between those two. Good reflection, right? You want to ask yourself, of the many potential issues going on, what's one issue that they're most likely to work with me on? So if I go in there and I say, you are disrespecting me, right? If I say the meetings are really fast paced and I'm not getting a chance to express my insights, they might work with me a little more, right? So I want to think through what's one issue that they're likely to work with me on. If I make the interruptions about a process in the meeting, maybe we don't have agendas, and so I can't come to the meeting prepared. And so by the time I think of something smart to contribute, we've already moved on, or people aren't ready to listen to me, and I've already lost my airspace. It could be, the issue is that we don't have agendas for our meetings. Now, that's getting at me not feeling set up for success. But the issue that the person might be willing to buy into is we don't have an agenda, which is different than me making the issue about not feeling respected. Yeah, this is where we really need a sounding partner. And that's why I gave you my information at the beginning of this. If you want to brainstorm stuff, email back and forth on what the real issues are. Because if I go in saying you don't respect me, right, that's going to blow up probably. But if I go in saying the agendas, are getting in the way of me kind of contributing, well, it's an easier thing to buy into, right? What structures or variables are contributing to my frustration? So as we talked about, right, the meeting not having agendas. And if one issue was resolved with this person, what one issue would reap the rewards? So is that one issue that we, talk more respectfully, that we have more trust, that just you're set up for success? Here's what you can do with the agenda. It's really some reflective questions to prep on what is the issue. This is the hardest step. We got to get to the bottom of our spin in step 1, and step 2 of the 8 steps is for sure the hardest. So you want to get to 5 to 7 words for really what's the bottom of your spin, what's the issue. So if I use the agenda one as an example, right, we don't have agendas in our meetings, 7 words, right? You could say, I feel disrespected, 3 words. So think about what the other person, if they're a really like soft, caring hearted person, then maybe it works to say, I don't feel respected. If they're operational, go, 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 fast, 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 move, 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 then it might make more sense to go on the agenda piece, right? Or maybe it's a thing of, I'm not at the right meetings for my ideas to be brought up, and so I feel respected, right? So maybe the issue is I'm not in the right meeting, 6 words. So the idea behind the 5 to 7 words for the issue is really very much around keeping the language really elementary and simple, right? People feel manipulated when we wordsmith stuff. It gets all fancy. We use big words. Like, keep it elementary, keep it simple, keep it 5 to 7 words. And the idea behind this model is really that you're laying out all 8 steps which I'll kind of lay out as we go along here. But you're laying out all 8 steps in 60 seconds or less. And that's a strategy from Susan Scott. She did the book Fierce Conversations in the early 2000s. And so I've adapted this model based on just my experience with the clients and how they're sort of seeing the application of some of what she's promoting in the book Fierce Conversations. So, excuse me. So think about simple words and 5 to 7 words, because you're going to lay this out in 60 seconds or less. Good. All right. So there are some tips that you want to think about to framing the issue. Let's lay out some of these together. And feel free to chat if you have some lived experience that we can also value and share with the group. So you want to keep it objective, fact-based, so not opinion. So the moment, the moment that you make it like, I think you don't value me, whew, that is going to blow up, right? So not opinion, we want to be fact-based. You do want to keep I know that I've said this, but really the real issue, people can sense if you're faking it, if you're not being authentic, right? So you do want to be heartfelt and vulnerable when you name the issue. You want to think about what matters to the other person. You know, what's their agenda? What are they thinking about? What are their values? And you really want to avoid the victim mindset. You know, if you go in there kind of like, oh, poor me, this is really hard, I don't know what that's just hard for people to engage in. So objective and fact-based and not opinion, those are, I think, the 3 paramount ones that you really want to keep in on that. So that's really going to bring you then to the refined issue, right? So I might say, I don't feel valued. Well, what are the facts that I can use to really get at that? And again, in 5 to 7 words. So you can see why naming the issue is just such a challenging spot for people, because it's really hard to pare that down. So what's fun about this, I was doing this workshop years ago and had a group of leaders from a healthcare system, and they, you know, learned the 8 steps, and they went back to their office, and one leader went to another colleague and said, hey, I've got to do the crucial conversation with somebody, you know, performance issue. The employee wasn't showing up well. It wasn't a write-up, but they needed to get some awareness from the employee. What you're doing is problematic, right? Like, I need you to understand this, because the tough conversation, as we said earlier, is not fixing. The tough conversation is developing a shared understanding of the issue. So when you're dealing with employee relation problems, you know, it's often hazardous to just jump in and discipline, unless of course it's really egregious. There's that first step of, let's have a shared understanding. This is what I see going on. This is how it's problematic. This is a tough conversation, right? And so the leader who attended my workshop said, I need to prep this tough conversation. Can I bounce it off of you? And the other leader happened to be in the workshop too and said, me too, let's both do one. Then they ended up recording it and listening to each other's recording as they role played it. I thought that was just brilliant. Now, one of my strategies is I will take a Post-it note. I'm looking on my desk here. I'll take a Post-it note and I'll actually put it on the back of my phone and have just like a key word from every step. And of course, you pick up your phone a million times a day, and that helps me kind of memorize the key words, right? Because you can see as we're doing step 1 and step 2 that language matters. If I say I, you, it's going to create a bit of an explosive environment for the tough conversation, right? These other leaders that I just referenced, they recorded themselves and they listened to it after, because it's a 60-second conversation, right? It's fast. And they recorded themselves so they could just hear the tone of their voice, the language. You just hear it differently when you record yourself. So whatever your strategy is, get really intentional around 5 to 7 words per step and thinking through what that language is, because we really want people to, you know, be open to the tough conversation. All right. So steps 3 through 8 are, you know, in our limited time that we have here. Normally my workshop is 2 90-minute sessions. So I really wanted to cover today some of the tough ones, and then spend a little bit of time thinking about step 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 with you. So step number 3, and again, these are all rolled out in 60 seconds, is naming the behavior. right? So if there's not any agendas in the meeting, then I need to say, of the last 5 meetings we've had, none have had agendas, right? Very specific, very fact-based. If I say the I feel statement, this is, I like sigh with you because this is high school health and people don't talk in I feel statements. People, they use like and that. So let me just stop sharing my screen for a second again here. So what happens is people say, I feel like you don't respect me. I feel that you don't respect me. Like and that are not feeling words. Whew. Now we do that because tough conversations are tough, and tough conversations make us be vulnerable, and we don't feel like being vulnerable with that person. That is super frustrating, right? So this step is so important because you really got to pour your heart out there. And what happens with the I feel statement is it engenders the other person in the vulnerability dance. So let's go back here to looking at that. So I feel frustrated, hurt, sad, happy, whatever those things are, right? And it needs to be a feeling word. If I say, I feel like you're disrespecting me, like isn't a feeling word. If I say, I feel that you don't support me, that isn't a feeling word. So very simply, I feel blank, period. I feel undermined, I feel ignored, I feel undervalued, I feel hurt, angry. People often say disappointed, which can work. Disappointed also involves like a guilty tone to it. So that can make the conversation turn into a bit of a condescending scenario versus you pouring your heart out there. Because if we can't be honest and vulnerable, how can we expect the other person to be, right? You also want to get at the why, step 5. So if, the issue is we don't have agendas, the last 5 meetings we haven't had agendas, I feel caught off guard in the meeting and can't talk. Why does that matter? Well, I feel caught off in the meeting and can't really express my thoughts, and therefore never really feel like I get a chance to sort of contribute to the conversation. Oh, well, now that matters. Your contribution is step number 6, and by your, it means your contribution, you. So if I'm the one feeling disrespected, undervalued, hurt, ignored, I've done something to contribute to that situation. This is the second hardest thing to really crystallize. So that involves you doing a deeper dive into the vulnerability. And really, we get more into details on this in the workshop that's longer. But really, there's 2 people. If there's a tough conversation, you've done something to add to it, right? It takes 2 to tango. And so you really want to think through what is your go-to mode when it comes to conflict. And that's more often than not what is really getting at the number 6 step, right? Your contribution. So I know me personally, my life motto is I'm a bridge. Obviously, I'm a helper. I'm a pleaser. I want things to be smooth and relational. And you're right, I avoid conflict. So I think of that story I started off with earlier with the school teacher, right? I mean, I felt frustrated with her for years and never pulled her on the carpet for it, right? My bad. So this poor teacher is having a tough conversation. How many months later? That's not very fair to her. I own that, right? When I think about my mom conversation moving to the Caribbean, I was probably drunk with excitement, and I didn't think about how that felt for my mom leaving, right? My contribution is I wasn't sensitive to her feelings and where she was coming at. I own that. Now, when you get to step 6, the other person is more likely to own their contribution in this dynamic. And then you really want to pull people into how much this can get better when you work together, future focus. And lastly, you then want to engage the other person in what they think. Now that 60 seconds wraps up at the end of step 8, and then the real conversation happens where you debate back and forth around, you know, getting the other person to understand it. But you want to lay out the tough conversation in 60 seconds or less, which is following these steps. So ask yourself, you know, is a deeper dive on this skill training right for you? You know, if you want to learn more about these 8 steps, and there's some wonderful nuances that you can apply to any type of communication, not just the tough conversation, then the workshop's right for you. If you're interested in developing more as a communicator, building your confidence, identifying communication skills as important in your work and really evolving to the next step, then yeah, we want to connect and get you in. Normally I charge $100 for those deeper dive workshops. Of course, today Higher Level is doing a great job giving you these nuggets for free. I normally charge $100, but because I love Higher Level and therefore I love you, you can connect with me and I will give you the discount of $50 instead of $100. So I would love to hear from you on your takeaways and your commitment in having tougher conversations. So while you're thinking about the bravery that you might have in chatting those in, I want to keep my final screen up here for you so you can connect with me on LinkedIn, my cell phone number, my email. I would love to help you really develop your skills at having these tough conversations. I mean, gosh, they pop up in the service industry, whether you're in a hotel and something's amiss with the room, or you're having a tough conversation with a loved one, a friend, a colleague. You know, it can even be tough conversations in good ways. I was traveling to Southern Illinois. Erin and I were talking about a trip I had recently doing some work there, and I got to the budget rental car and there were lineup out the door, crazy frustrating. And I really wanted to hammer home some feedback with the agent because he was really good. And so I wanted to have sort of a tough conversation so that he heard how great he was being in the face of this terrible, stressful environment. People were angry all over the place. So you can have tough conversations in terms of like rigor, because your positive message is so important. You really want people to hear it. So I delivered like a 30-second tough conversation with this budget guy so that he heard how valuable his work was and his approach to that. So tough conversations in 8 steps. The really important part is nailing down that issue, which you can't do until you get to the bottom of your spin, and then working through the other steps 3 through 8 as I identified. If you're interested, let's connect. I'd love to hook you up. We do monthly tough conversation workshops. It's fun to get in those because you can see each other. They're a more intimate setting, and it's just nice to get with other employees and leaders going through the same stuff that you are, right? We're not alone in this. I say all the time that the answer's in the room, and part of my work as a consultant is to help bring those people together so that you do get the answers you want, and the training really tailored to your skills and growing the strengths that you have. So all of that said, Erin, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Carrie. I appreciate that. Man, I couldn't be writing fast enough. I know, we've been working with Carrie for several years, and it's just a work in progress. You'll never have it perfect, but I think just working at it and, you know, taking leadership advice and attending some of Carrie's seminars, and, you know, she does her own webinar programs, like she said, definitely would recommend it.
I forgot, Erin, to say that I have a handout, and for the people on, normally in Zoom, you know, you can attach documents to the Zoom chat. I don't think that GoToWebinar works that way. So if people do want that, let me just share my contact information. I'm happy to share the handout with you, right? So if you were taking lots of notes, awesome, Erin, like your model. Also, I can email you some of that too. Of course, it's not capturing all the brilliance of your notes, but it can just help you with some of those steps.
Absolutely. And I wanted to share, so we had a really great story that just came through on how you inspired her to speak to a boss. So Whitney said, I've stressed for about a year now over a conversation I had with a boss. I had tried to have it several times, but it never seemed to go well. You helped me realize that she wasn't ready to hear it. I hadn't thought about it. So thanks for helping her move on. So that's great.
Wow, you must be seeing chats that I can't see. This is awesome. Did we miss any questions in there, Erin?
We didn't. No. Does anyone else have any questions? You can shoot those to us right now, but no questions have come in yet. But thanks, Whitney, for sharing that.
Yes, totally, Whitney. I'm looking, and I think that I'm, in my view anyway, we'll have to figure this out after, Erin. It looks like I'm the only one chatting, so I'd love that you chatted, Whitney, and everyone else who did. Thank you. Felt like I just had a really cold audience, so that's even cooler. Um, yeah, so excellent, Whitney, right? People are sometimes not ready for the conversation, and that puts you in pushing a boulder, and there's a bunch of things you can do, and we get into this stuff in the workshop, right? Like if people aren't ready for the conversation, what are your other options? Because pushing a boulder is just going to burn us out more, and it creates more tension in the relationship. So good for you. Like for whatever reason, your boss isn't ready, you're going to have that emotional intelligence to read the situation well and to kind of back off. Yeah.
Yeah, great point. Well, that wraps up for today. Thanks for joining us. So speaking of really great conversations, higher level, we have our first virtual summit coming up at the end of June on June 29th. This is going to be a 3-hour event that we're hosting with other HR professionals. We have a great lineup speaking HR, retention, the great engagement, even some legal law topics, which we can't get enough of. So
Yeah.
tune in. We'll be sending a follow-up to let you register for that, of course. And then if you want to just shoot me a quick email, hello@higherlevel.com, I can make sure you are some of the first on the list to register. So that will be a virtual event, and we are giving away free lunch for those that register early. So check that.
Great, Erin. Thanks so much for the invite. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you. Have a great Wednesday.